Hey, what is going on guys? RZ Stealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the new strong and weak picks heading into patch 8.17. So the first change here is a really interesting one, and it's to Annie. So Annie's range is getting reverted back to where it was in Season 5. I'll have up on screen here the change she got back in Season 5, and it was to her attack range. It did end up getting reduced from 625 down to 575, and they're just changing that back now in this patch. So it's going back up to 625, and this might bring back Annie support for 8.17. If you guys do remember back in like Season 5, Annie's support was actually one of the strongest support picks. It was a champion that was played a ton in the competitive scene, and it was an S tier pick down in the support role. So with this change here, adding on 50 range to Annie's auto attacks, her ability to harass just with auto attacks in the early laning phase is going to be a lot better down in the support role. And even for Annie mid lane, in certain matchups to where she'd get bullied and she wouldn't be able to CS, for example, if she's going up against like a Vel'Koz or Orianna, just these champions that outrange her and she can't really do a ton in the laning phase, this change is really going to help her out, and it is going to allow her to harass and CS in lane a lot better now. So overall, I do think that for support and for mid lane, this should make Annie a pretty solid pick for next patch. I do think that in a lot of matchups for mid lane Annie, she is going to have a much easier time now in the laning phase, just not getting bullied a ton. And then down in the support role, in melee matchups, when she's up against like melee supports, her ability to harass in the laning phase and her ability to just harass the enemy AD carry because of this big range increase here is going to be really nice for next patch. So next up, we have a buff to Bard. So Bard's ultimate's cooldown is being lowered from 130 to 110 at rank 1. So this is actually a pretty significant change to Bard. I think this does affect him more so for the competitive scene than for solo queue, because Bard's ultimate is something that you can use whenever it's off cooldown. You can be looking to set up ganks and set up picks whenever it's up. So I do think that the playmaking potential with this cooldown decrease here will be a lot better in the early game. And also for solo queue, if you are snowballing in the early game, then this change is going to be really nice because you're going to be able to look for picks a lot more often. I don't think this change really brings Bard up that much though. I don't think it brings him up into S tier. In my opinion, Bard is a solid A tier pick in 8.16 right now for solo queue, and I don't think this change is enough to bring him up into S tier. So next up here is a buff to Fiora. So Fiora's ease damage is being increased by 20% at rank 1, and then once you do scale it up, it's going to be the same at rank 5. So this is a decent buff here to Fiora, but I don't think it really moves her up in the tier list. I think she's going to stay a solid A tier pick for next patch. If Fiora were to move up into S tier for the next few patches or sometime in the next few patches, it would be due to the fact that we are slowly starting to see tanks in the top lane coming back into the meta here. In the competitive scene, there's been a lot more tank play in this patch, and there's probably going to be a lot more tank play in next patch as well. So with tanks being played in competitive, they might start seeing more play in solo queue, and that would be the main reason to why Fiora would get stronger. I don't think that this change directly really makes her that much of a better top lane pick. So Kassadin is getting buffed again. I think it was 2 or 3 patches ago, Kassadin got some pretty significant AP ratio increases on his abilities, and in this patch now, he's getting a change to his ultimate to where the cooldown is being reduced at rank 1 and rank 2. At rank 1, it's going down by a full second, which is actually pretty significant there. At rank 2, it's going down by 0.5, but I do think that Kassadin is actually a pretty strong pick right now in patch 8.16. He can use the sustain build really well in the laning phase. He can go Corrupting Potion, Dark Seal, he can run Time Warp Tonic, and it's actually pretty hard to bully Kassadin out in the laning phase. He also doesn't have super bad matchups right now, and with AD Assassins also getting indirectly nerfed in next patch, I think that Kassadin could actually be an S tier mid laner for solo queue in 8.17. So we have a small change here to Master Yi. I think this change is pretty insignificant for him for next patch, and I think he's just going to stay an A tier pick. So his cooldown on his W is being lowered by 7 seconds there at all ranks, and then his W's damage reduction, it is being increased in the earlier ranks there. So I do think that this change, obviously it's a buff to Yi, it makes him stronger for next patch, but I don't think it makes him like an S tier pick in 8.17. I think he's just going to stay a solid A tier pick despite these buffs. And then similar to Yi, Kayn is getting a change in next patch that is obviously going to make him stronger because it is a buff, but I don't think it really changes his place in the tier list. Also for next patch, Duskblade and Stormrazor are getting nerfed, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So even though he is getting these direct buffs here, he's getting indirect nerfs, which I think should even out, and it shouldn't really make him that much stronger or weaker for next patch. So Garen is getting a change for next patch. His Q damage is being reduced at rank 5 by 20. It stays the same there at rank 1. It only gets reduced by 5 at rank 2. So it's not until you scale it up to rank 5 until it does see a significant damage decrease. So what this means for Garen is that you might just max E out first now instead of Q. Depending on the matchup, like you'd go for Q max or for E max on Garen. If you're in a melee matchup and you're able to get a lot of Qs off in the laning phase and you're able to trade a ton, then this Q nerf here, and if you were to still max Q out first, it would hurt quite a bit and it would definitely decrease Garen's trading potential in the laning phase. I don't really think this makes him that much of a weaker pick for next patch. Like I said, it might just mean that players do go for Emax first now, and I still think that Garen is going to be a very strong top lane pick for 8.17. And then the final direct change to champions for next patch is to Rengar, and Rengar's getting a pretty big buff here to his ultimate for next patch. The cooldown is being decreased by 20 seconds at rank 1, and because Rengar's ultimate is an ability that you always want to be looking to use in the early game whenever it's off cooldown, this is actually a really big buff to Rengar. I think that right now in this patch, he's a solid A tier jungler, and with this change for next patch here, I think this could move him up into S tier. If it doesn't quite move him up into S tier, then I think he's gonna definitely be a top A tier pick for 8.17, but nonetheless, I do think Rengar is gonna be a super good jungler with this change for next patch. And then if we take a look at the Duskblade and Stormrazor nerfs now, this is why I said like the buffs to Kayn and also to Rengar, I guess, aren't as significant because they are also getting indirectly nerfed. So Duskblade here, the lethality on it is being increased by 3, but the unique passive, the damage on hit that you get with it is being reduced there by quite a bit once you do get some levels on your champion, and once you do hit the later stages of the game, it's not going to have as much burst damage. So this does hurt the one-shot potential of assassins for next patch. One champion that is going to hurt more than others from this change is Wukong here, because Wukong got direct nerfs the past 2 patches. He got his E nerfed and his Q nerfed in 8.15 and in 8.16. And then in this patch, he's getting another indirect nerf here with the Duskblade and Stormrazor nerfs. So I'm not too sure why Wukong is not getting any compensation buffs at all. It just feels like Wukong's an assassin that has been nerfed way more than other assassins over the past few patches, and he's just going to be a pretty weak assassin pick now for 8.17. So overall though, this definitely does not by any means gut assassins for next patch. I still think they're going to be very strong picks, and this might just mean that your itemization on assassins will change up a little bit. You could go for something like a Youmuu's Rush now in next patch instead of Duskblade, or you can even still rush Duskblade because the damage on it in the early game is not changing a ton. It's only in the mid to late game there when you are going to feel a bit of a damage decrease on it. So I do think that overall it's a small nerf to assassins, but they're still going to be very good for 8.17. And then Stormrazor here is getting a pretty big change for next patch. The AD on the item is being lowered, the attack speed is being increased, and then the crit is being changed to where the more crit that you do end up buying now, it's gonna be a lot better and it's gonna scale a lot better with this item. If you're not building crit, then it does mean that the crit you do get with Stormrazor is gonna be, it is gonna deal a little bit less damage now for 8.17. So with these changes here, it is more of a nerf to AD assassins. They're changing it to where you do actually need to build crit now in order for the crit that you get from Stormrazor to actually hurt a lot. So because AD assassins don't usually build any crit, this change does affect them. And then also the AD is getting lowered there, so that affects assassins. And assassins aren't usually benefiting a ton from attack speed, so because the attack speed there is getting increased, it's not the best for assassins. Now with AD carries, this does nerf AD carries a little bit in the early game. Once you do get 2 Zeal items though, this is going to end up being a buff to AD carries, so overall in the early game, Stormrazor is going to be a weaker item. As a 1 item spike, it's going to be weaker than what it is in 8.16, so it just overall makes any champion that's picking this item up as their first item weaker in the early game, but once you do reach the mid to late game, it makes AD carries a little bit stronger. And then Graves and Kindred are also going to get a little bit weaker with this change. They usually would pick this item up as their first core item after they finish their jungle item. So because Stormrazor is getting weaker here in the early game, it is going to indirectly make Graves and Kindred's early game a little bit weaker as well. I know that for Kindred, most players actually don't build Stormrazor on her, so it's not going to affect her as much. I think it's definitely going to affect Graves a little bit more though, because Stormrazor right now on Graves is just a very strong early game item. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. That's what we're looking at heading into patch 8.17. If you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.